Hi, Jonesy here. Just wanted to put a few of my thoughts down regarding how we're looking at the conditioning program with the top teams currently. It's a bit of an exercise for myself in clarifying my thoughts, but also providing some of the athletes and staff in the program a bit of insight into how we currently think about it. The disclaimer I will throw out there is that we're constantly growing, learning and developing, so this is my take on it at the moment, but for sure that's going to shift over time. So what we're trying to do with our conditioning sessions is to develop our ability to repeat high intensity efforts. The graphic here shows an example of how to look at these efforts in terms of the ability to produce power. So can you actually hit the ball hard? Can you move quickly? Can you jump high? Can you do an explosive change of direction? Also in terms of the ability to sustain these power outputs throughout a rally. So can you sustain it for a 3-second rally, a 5-second rally, out to a 12, 15, 18-second rally. And finally the ability to repeat it, so that's backing it up point after point. I've been playing with this graphic to explain this with athletes and coaches and getting them to rate their performance in each of these areas. And also seeing how that matches up the view of the athlete with that of the coach, with that of what I see, and then also overlaying our fitness testing data and our physical profiling data to see, where are the opportunities for growth in those areas. So to improve the ability to repeat high intensity efforts, we want to have a look at the qualities or the fitness components that underpin this. So we know how to train to improve this quality. It's not just about doing high intensity efforts to improve them. We want to find the training methods that develop the ability, not just express the ability. So the ability to complete high intensity repeated efforts is dependent on two major factors: having a good alactic capacity and a high lactic threshold. So your alactic capacity is your ATP PC system. This is being able to produce those explosive efforts. With the lactate threshold, that's basically the higher that is, the better you're able to clear your lactate, and you also suffer less fatigue because you're less dependent on producing lactate. You can produce more energy aerobically. So you'll see when we come to the training program that we're chasing those two qualities and the sub-qualities that underpin them. The second thing that we're looking at is with our conditioning work is tying into that big chunk called work capacity. We're looking to build robust athletes that can handle the loads required to compete and train at the required level. And conditioning work is another piece of the puzzle that's helping to build that alongside our progressive overload in our ball practices, our load management strategies, our lifting program, and the whole picture. It's basically working off the idea that the greater the work capacity, the greater the ability of the athlete to handle stress, whether that being environmental stress from being in the sun, the wind and the heat all day, or whether it be travel stress from the travel demands of the world tour, avoiding illness, all that sort of stuff. So the greater the work capacity, the better your ability to absorb stress and handle life on the tour. The final point on this slide is to look at where the conditioning program sits overall in the training plan and on the list of priorities for each athlete. Some qualities you want as much as necessary, others you want as much as you can get. I think when it comes to conditioning in beach volleyball, it's probably a case of getting as much as necessary, where other qualities such as speed and vertical jump, we're chasing as much as we can get. I heard a quote I liked that fitness won't win you the match, but it might lose it for you. So it's a matter of putting all this stuff in context and figuring out what the big rocks are and what's going to give you the most return on investment, keeping in mind it's a ball game. It's not just about fitness. To revisit some of the physiology of the game, we know the match is short with pretty much everything coming in under an hour. We know it's about short high intensity efforts with the major chunks of the points being under 12 seconds. There is some variation in the average point duration. As we know, this is dependent on a lot of factors. We also know there's variation in the rest periods. if we look to the rule book, it should be 12 seconds between points, but we see TV games having significantly longer pauses. We also see the levels our athletes play on all the way down to a tournament where there's no multiple ball system and they're hitting the ball and having to go chase it. So that's also playing into the work-rest ratios. We actually plan to update some of this research. We have a bunch of footage of matches of all different levels, which can be easily coded for work-rest durations. And we're specifically looking to look at some of these differences between a TV or a non-TV match, the different levels of tournaments, and also the differences between the men's and women's game. A lot of coaches will suggest that there's longer rallies on the women's side, so we want to check some of those numbers and see what the trends actually are. We also want to look at linking the point durations to our coding and data that we're taking with the matches, so we can, in the review of a match, look at what sort of match was it, what percentage of points were under 5 seconds, what percentage of points were 5 to 10 seconds, what percentage of points were greater than 15 seconds, for example. And then we can also look at our success in those points, which can give us, I think it's a step towards trying to make a link between the physical qualities we're trying to develop and whether they're transferring to the court and to performance. Playing style also feeds into the physiology here, and it'll also feed into how we prescribe and our sessions. Are we looking to play power volleyball, or is it more of an economical style volleyball? And you can see changes in how different volleyball nations have approached that. Finally, there's been little bits of research into taking lactates during match play, and what's it found? It found that there weren't significantly high levels. You need to be prepared to tolerate the odd surge into lactate levels, but it isn't a huge feature of beach volleyball match play. It also ties in with the first slide when we mentioned that having a high lactate threshold and a well-developed aerobic system to firstly not be as reliant on the lactate system because you're delivering energy aerobically, and secondly also be really efficient at clearing it when it does develop. So a few basic principles that we follow. The second one again was tying in with the lactate stuff, was teach them not to suffer rather than to suffer well, and that sort of fits this polarized model of training that you see being utilized in a lot of endurance sports. With this, they're training both ends of the spectrum with good quality alactic work, ATP, PC sort of work, and the other end of the spectrum with good quality aerobic work and staying away from that middle ground. The idea is that we, again, develop the aerobic system to an extent that we're not dependent on producing high lactates. Having said that, the first principle we want to ensure, based off the analysis of the sport, that we're not preparing for the average scenario, but we're in fact preparing for the most extreme scenario. So 90% of rallies are under 12 seconds, but we need to be prepared for these longer rallies, as often they can be the game breakers and really shift the momentum of the match. Also on it, so does that make sense? Prepare for the extreme, but not the average. The principle here, produce before endure, refers to the idea of first investing in the ability to be fast, jump high, hit hard, before you worry about having to sustain those qualities. If you're slow and can't jump, you're not much better off being able to be repeatedly slow and repeatedly unable to jump. So it's about getting those things in the right order. It's always a discussion around each individual in the context of their training, but that's a general principle of building the explosiveness and then getting better at repeating it. Considering the mechanical as well as the metabolic demands, it's not just about looking at the work to rest ratios and targeting the specific energy systems you want to hit. It's also about looking at the mechanical demands of what you're doing and factoring that into your prescription. We put a large emphasis on developing good movement patterns and qualities, so we want to ensure that this carries over to the conditioning sessions and we don't just shift our focus totally to heart rates and work to rest ratios and forget about the quality of movement. I think if we can develop robust, mechanically sound athletes, that means we can have the option of doing specific on-court conditioning as a means of getting fit because their musculoskeletal system can handle it. But if joints and tendons aren't ready for this sort of training, then we need to respect that and program accordingly. We've had examples of doing conditioning sessions in low heart rate zones on the sand, which was where we were focusing on the metabolic perspective, but we found that moving slowly in the sound blew up people's calves. So that's a nice example of focusing on the metabolic and forgetting the mechanical stuff. So we also see it coming up with some of our on-court conditioning sessions with pattern overload. So doing a interval shuttle session where there's too many, on a small court with too many turning points and causing, mechanical overload rather, and so we need to factor that into what we're trying to get out of the session. So all these things need to be taken on board. Concurrent training, we just need to be mindful that there's competing demands in team sport athletes who are often trying to develop strength, power and speed qualities alongside endurance qualities, not to mention all the other demands of technical. So beach volleyball has a unique blend of these qualities that you need, and they usually need to be developed concurrently. So the key with this, and I won't go into the details, but it's about making sure we structure our year, month, week, day and session appropriately in order to optimize those adaptations. So session placement within the training week becomes really, really important. So what does our actual program look like in terms of how we structure it up? We have these general phases. The names you could change a little bit, but general, specific, pre-comp and comp. The general themes in the top part here: non-specific work in the general prep phase, looking for a bit of central change in the aerobic system. Specific phase, we're getting more towards the same muscle groups being used and the right energy system used, but we still might be using general movement patterns. Pre-competition, using the skills of the sport to condition the athletes more, so it's more of that specific work capacity. So this might be repeated volleyball actions on the court, that sort of stuff. And in competition, playing the sport is our primary conditioning stimulus, and we're supplementing with some non-specific work as we need. So going through the next lines here, this is how we're looking at the speed power stuff and the development of the alactic system, and the bottom line is the development of the aerobic system. In the general phase with our speed sessions, we might be working on a bit of technical speed stuff, building up the intensities and basically prepping the musculoskeletal system and the nervous system for maximal intensity stuff. Shifting through to the specific phase, it's basically speed power work. Okay, so adhering to the principles of a speed power session, you want to be fresh, the efforts are short duration, there's long rest, there's high quality, and this can take the form of jump stuff. It can be in our resistance training, max strength work, it can be med ball throw stuff, it can be speed work on the court, it can also be our volleyball coach, how they conduct their sessions in that manner, with long rest periods and high quality. Phasing through to pre-comp phase, where we're looking to work on the sustained component of that pyramid that we're looking at, and lengthening the duration of some of those work efforts. So speed, endurance, so building a bit more time into your work intervals in your speed sessions. And then in the comp phase, we're maintaining our speed with some work in the warm-ups, and also all of our strength power work in the gym to maintain that system functioning well. On the aerobic side, we might use some more general methods in the first phase. Bike and swim sessions have been really good for us in the last years. The grass running stuff, I think, has a place with our young guys in terms of their general athletic development. Phasing that through to the specific phase, these sessions have also been really effective for us. These are your classic aerobic intervals, and we might phase them from 30s down to 20s down to 15s. This is in the sand. This is like you see the right muscle groups and energy systems being used, but it might be a non-specific pattern. We might be doing some shuttles. You might be doing some shuttles with a push-up, get down and up. You know, a really relevant pattern for volleyball. It could be some general lateral movement, all that sort of stuff. And that session also, as we shift along into pre-comp, shifts to more specific volleyball patterns. So we might be doing shadow work, diving, chasing a ball, get up, have a swing. This can be without a ball. We can also introduce a ball in. We can add decision-making components in there. The work intervals can shift to more specific work-rest ratios that you'll see in match play. And again, we'll look at getting the quality right in that session and then building on the ability to endure it. So I look at the 80% rule with those sort of sessions, the final actions. So say the athlete is doing a run, dive, hit, get up, chase a ball, and finishing with an attack. We want 4 out of 5 of those attacks on the target, not hitting the tape, power driven. So that's sort of using coach's eye to say, is the quality good enough? If 3 out of 5 or 2 out of 5, then it's too hard, and we're not getting the quality that we want. The other thing in this phase, shortly before competition, I think it is worthwhile doing a small amount of lactate tolerance work. We know that system adapts a bit more quickly, and some of these aerobic adaptations take longer to develop. So that's why we only do a small amount of this stuff at the end, coming into the season. In competition, same thing. The aerobic sessions, or volleyball, is the main stimulus to maintain fitness, but in our training weeks in between competition blocks, so we might have a block of 3 events and then a training week of 2, then I think we need to slot in one of these conditioning sessions, the repeat effort sessions on the sand. So a couple of the additional concepts that we're looking to layer into these sessions in that program. One of them is the central governor theory of fatigue, and that's basically looking at how the brain serves to protect us and maintain homeostasis by subconsciously pacing, or with some athletes it's even a conscious pacing strategy, as a protective mechanism. So some little tricks to override that mechanism is occasionally setting, say we're doing a session of 3 sets of 15 repeated efforts. The athletes will complete the session and then we'll throw a couple of extra reps at them, just to override. So the brain thinks it's doing 3 sets of 15 and will pace accordingly, but then you'll chuck a couple extras at them to override that mechanism. Or you could do little things like simply not telling them how many sets and reps they're doing for a particular session. It's something we wouldn't use a lot, as you want the athletes to trust you. So if you say you're doing 3 sets of 15, they need to believe they're doing 3 sets of 15. Otherwise, they'll pace themselves anyway. And another concept we're looking to weave into this is how to integrate an on-court conditioning session with the ball session. So initially the goal is usually have good quality practice, so we put the conditioning session after the ball session. But to start to challenge skills and decision making under fatigue, you can start to play with integrating some conditioning work throughout the session, or even at the front end of the session if you to really put some fatigue in the system before you're getting to the skills session. So that's something that we can play with in phases if that's identified as a goal we want to work on. So hopefully that gives a bit of a snapshot of some of the things we're looking at. I'd be really interested in any feedback from anyone, so please shoot it through. Thanks.